She stood in the middle of the courtroom, small, tired, and trembling. All eyes were on her, but it wasn't her crime they were whispering about. It was the moment she spoke. "I'm hungry," she said softly, her voice cracking. For a second, everything stopped. The gavel froze mid-air, the crowd held its breath, and even the judge's expression shifted. No one knew what would happen next. But what unfolded in that silent room would reveal a truth far bigger than anyone expected. Her name was Amara, just 14, and she'd never been inside a courtroom before. Most days her world was small, a cramped apartment, the laughter of her younger brother, and the constant hum of her mother working late shifts to keep food on the table. School was her escape, a place where she could dream beyond the cracked walls of home. But lately, even school felt heavy. Empty lunch trays, growling stomachs, and the quiet shame of pretending she wasn't hungry had become part of her routine. That day, she walked into the courthouse believing her life would go on as usual. She had no idea that a single sentence, 3 small words, would change everything. The judge's eyes narrowed as Amara's words echoed through the courtroom. A murmur rippled across the benches, but she kept her gaze on the floor, afraid to meet anyone's stare. "What did you say?" the judge asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority and irritation. She swallowed hard. "I'm hungry, sir." It should have been a simple statement, but in that room, in front of strangers judging her worth, it became something else, an accusation. A social worker shuffled her papers uncomfortably. The prosecutor, a tall man in a crisp suit, smirked as if the moment didn't matter. But it did. For Amara, it was the only thing that mattered. The truth was, Amara hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her mother's paycheck had been delayed, the pantry shelves empty. She'd walked miles to get to court, her head light, her stomach aching. And now, standing in front of a man who held her fate in his hands, the only thing she could think to say was the truth. The judge glanced at the bailiff, whispering something too low for Amara to hear. A faint chuckle from the prosecutor sent heat rushing to her cheeks. Was her hunger funny to them? The questions began, sharp, cold, and quick. Why hadn't she eaten? Where were her parents? Did she expect pity? Amara answered each one softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But as she spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The courtroom wasn't just looking at a case anymore. They were looking at a child, a black girl stripped of her dignity in front of people, who decided her value without knowing her story. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. "You do realize," he began slowly, "this is a court of law, not a charity?" The words struck her like a slap, and she clenched her fists, trying not to cry. But before he could continue, a voice from the back interrupted. "Your Honor, with all due respect." It was a woman, standing tall, her hands trembling but her eyes burning with conviction. Everyone turned to look at her, waiting for what she would say. And that's when the real battle began. The woman's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Your Honor, she's a child. She's standing here hungry, and you're questioning her as if that hunger is a crime." Gasps spread across the room. The judge's gavel struck hard, demanding silence. But the damage was done. The truth was out in the open. Amara's eyes darted toward the woman, a stranger who looked at her with the kind of compassion she hadn't felt in months. But the judge's face darkened. "This is my courtroom," he snapped, "and I will not be lectured." His voice boomed, but there was something else there too. Discomfort. The prosecutor stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. We are here to discuss her case, not her appetite." The word hung in the air like an insult. Amara felt her chest tighten. Her hunger wasn't just a physical pain anymore. It was a spotlight, exposing her in a way that made her feel smaller than ever. The judge leaned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Do you have anything else to say for yourself, Amara?" Her mouth was dry, but she forced the words out. "Yes, I'm hungry, but not just for food." The room froze. Even the court reporter stopped typing. "I'm hungry for someone to listen. I'm hungry for someone to care. I'm hungry for the chance to be treated like a person, not a problem." Silence. For a moment, it felt as though the walls of the courtroom had absorbed every breath, every heartbeat. Then the judge slowly sat back, his jaw tight. No one knew what his verdict would be, but in that instant, the real judgment was already clear, and it wasn't on her. The judge didn't speak for several moments. When he finally did, his voice was quieter, more measured. "This court will take a brief recess," he said almost reluctantly. The bailiff approached Amara, guiding her toward a side room. Inside, a volunteer handed her a small sandwich and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but as she ate, her hands stopped trembling. For the first time that day, she felt human again. The woman who had spoken up for her entered the room, introducing herself as a community advocate. "You're not alone in this, Amara," she said softly. "You never were." The hearing resumed, but something had shifted. The judge's tone was less sharp, the questions more restrained. In the end, her case didn't disappear, but neither did her voice. People in that courtroom had heard her, truly heard her, and some would never forget the moment a hungry black girl forced them to see the humanity they'd ignored. Outside the courthouse, news had already begun to spread. A local journalist had caught her words on camera, and within days the clip went viral. Messages of support poured in, but so did reminders that her story wasn't unique. And that's the truth. Amara's voice echoed far beyond those four walls because it wasn't just her fight. It was the fight of every child who has been silenced. Every person whose basic dignity has been treated like a distraction. So the question lingers. How many more will have to speak through their hunger before we finally feed not just their bodies, but their right to be seen, heard, and respected?